What do a Pullman car, a farm, and a garden have in common? We'll learn today on Across the Fence. Hi, I'm Leonard Perry with University of Vermont Extension. Today I'm in southern Vermont at the former estate of Robert Todd Lincoln, the son of Abraham Lincoln. Before we begin our tour, let's get a brief overview of the history of Hildene.
Abraham and Mary Lincoln had 4 sons. Only one of them lived to adulthood, Robert Lincoln. Robert led a very interesting career in his own right. He was a successful lawyer. He became president of the Pullman Company, and along the way he served as minister to England and Secretary of War. So he had an interesting career in his own right. Once the family moved here in 1905, and they moved in the spring of 1905, every subsequent part of the Lincoln legacy, every generation spent a significant part of their lives at Hildene. So in order to really understand the Lincoln family, people are always interested in presidential children. And in order to really understand the rest of the Lincoln legacy, you have to come to Hildene because everything is here.
I know a lot has changed in the 20 years since I was here last. Could you talk about some of these changes?
Hildene was, when it came into being, was run as a house museum. That made perfect sense at the beginning, to restore the house, restore the gardens, and a little bit of area around it. But we also have 412 acres of land. We have almost the entire estate that the Lincolns had when they were here. And so the next chapter, if you will, is to take advantage of the entirety of the landscape, to bring it all into the experience. In other words, to convert from being simply a house museum, great house museum, but to convert from that to being a true cultural heritage site that draws people out across the entire property. So that's what we're working to do now. More recently, we have begun a farm at which we milk goats and make cheese. There was always agriculture at Hildene, and we're just taking it to the next sort of iteration. Of course, when they were here, it was cows, and they milked cows, and the product was butter. We decided to take it into the 21st century, if you will, and do something more consistent with what's going on in Vermont agriculture now, which is milking goats and making cheese. The other thing that's happened is that we have brought onto the property a 1903 wooden Pullman car, of course, built during Robert's tenure as president of the company. And that, on the one hand, helps people understand who Robert was, what his legacy is, and also, in some ways, it helps explain why Hildene is here, because, of course, that's how he really made the money to allow him to be in a position to buy a place like Hildene and build the house. When we went through the process selecting it and then the restoration process, we decided, first of all, that we wanted to have the finest example of a wooden Pullman car in existence, because if you're going to go to all the time and effort we went through to get that car restored and get it here, we decided, who wants the second best? So that's what we've achieved. The car is spectacular in its own right. But more importantly, the car is about history. It's not about how many bolts it has or its length or that kind of thing per se. It really, what we're doing with it in our interpretation is exploring the people who would have ridden on a car like this, it's not technically the Gilded Age, but essentially the Gilded Age, Robert's connection to the Pullman Company, and maybe most importantly, the role of the porters. And we have a timeline that runs from the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 through the Civil Rights Movement, let's say 1963. And then we explore within that the paradoxical legacy of the Pullman Company's relationship to the porters. The fact that on the one hand, the Pullman Company gave rise to the black middle class. It was the best job you could get at the time, higher wages, you could advance yourself, role models within the black middle class, and yet at the same time, there was inherent racism underlying the treatment of the porters. And so that history is paradoxical, and our job is just to draw out the paradox and let people think about it on their own. So that's what we're trying to achieve with it. So in other words, we're trying to do more than have the Pullman car be just about the Pullman car. We're trying to use it as a teaching tool and as a way for people to think about where we are in that continuum of race relations today.
What are some of the key features in the house?
Well, really, if you wanted to talk about the single key feature in the house, it is the fact that the furnishings are largely original. Nobody ever lived in the house but Lincolns. And Robert Lincoln's granddaughter, Peggy, who spent the longest time in the house, never really changed anything. Her interests were the outdoors more than the house. So the gift she left us after living in the house for 40 years is that she changed very little. So in large measure, when the Friends of Hildene took ownership in 1978, it was really as if Robert and Mary had gone out for lunch. And we took over from when she died in 1936 or him in 1926. Very little was changed, very much of it's original. So it's not a single piece per se. It really is the fact that the house feels very much intact, feels very much like it's still the Lincoln family home. If you did want to talk about a single piece, it would be the Aeolian organ, player organ, which we still use and guests get to hear when they come.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing to hear.
Yeah,
I don't know how many pipes, but a lot of...
1,000 pipes.
1,000 pipes, yeah, I guess it's one of the largest as some sort of record for the home.
It's one of the largest in a home. It's also one of the few that are still in very workable condition.
And of course, all the artifacts, whole room you have dedicated to Abraham Lincoln and his legacy, I think is pretty special to see too.
That is of course we have a special exhibit up, and we rotate those through from time to time, and that's where we have a lot of our Lincoln artifacts at this point. One of the things we're doing at Hildene is we're trying to run it like the 21st century version of the Lincoln's very early 20th century estate. So sustainability is a key theme. When building the barn, we harvested the materials for the barn from the property in connection with our forest management plan. We have a sawmill. We milled all the wood ourselves. It took a year, 56,000 board feet, and then we built the barn. And so that in itself and that process makes a statement about what we're doing at Hildene. We run the farm on a 10-acre meadow. And part of the reason for that is that we want people to be able to see what you can do with a relatively small amount of land. There are other places that do a great job with dairy herds, and people can see dairy herds. We decided we wanted to do something different. We also wanted to take it very much into the 21st century and make it relevant so that when people look at it, understand what we're doing, they can see what you can do with a relatively small amount of land.
So Andrea, what kind of gardens do you have here at Hildene?
In addition to the formal gardens here at the house, we have a cutting and kitchen garden area, a butterfly garden, a berry cage, a peony observation area, an apple tree alley, and we're working on restoring the original hawthorn and lilac tree alley. I am the primary gardener, taking care of the flowering gardens again. I have a couple volunteers who work with me who are fantastic. And we have a great ground staff here at Hildene, including Carrie Lewis, who maintains the shrubs and trees, including the privet hedge here in the formal garden.
Tell us about this lovely formal garden.
This garden was originally designed by Jessie Lincoln, Robert's daughter, as a gift to her mother, Mary Harlan Lincoln. She spent a lot of time in France and designed this to be in the French parterre style in the pattern of a stained glass window. So if you look at it from the second floor window of the house, you can really get a good look at that. The privet hedge here is the leading in the stained glass window, and then the flowers represent the panes of glass. The only plants that are original to the garden today are the peonies, and there are a few iris and daylilies, which are done blooming now, that we believe are left over from that time. The rest of the plants, many of them are similar plants to what they would have had at the time, including the phlox, but we've also got new cultivars in here, things that work better for today. We're trying to be sustainable here at Hildene. We're trying to follow as many organic practices as possible. So we're choosing new plants that perhaps are lower maintenance, even that require less water, less pesticides, and that sort of thing.
So it looks like a lovely display, and I guess it's pretty much through the season.
Yes, we have flowers blooming from spring all the way into fall. It's been designed to be a continuous season of color.
So you mentioned the peonies. I know in the spring, I guess early summer rather, that's the one of your big displays here in some of the plants original. Tell us more about this collection you have.
The peonies we consider to be Hildene's horticultural legacy. They are the plants that are left over from the time of the Lincolns were here in the early 1900s. We have records of peonies arriving in Manchester at the train station to be held over winter and then to be planted in the spring here in the gardens. When the Friends took over in the late 70s, about 1980, they found large clumps of peonies that were likely to be, 100 years old. A lot of the peonies are unidentified to date. A few of them have been identified. Part of the problem with that is peonies can self-hybridize in the garden, and they were left here for 100 years and probably did that. So there are some peonies in here that we can't identify yet. Two of them we have found to be unique cultivars of peony, and we got them named through the American Peony Society. The first one that we got named was the Jesse Lincoln. That one's very special in that it has red stems through flowering. It starts to fade, after the flowers go, but the red stems maintain their color through flowering, and it has a lovely pale pink flower. The second one we named the Hildene, and that one's unique in that it's a single flower with pale pink as well, with a splash of deeper pink in the middle of each petal.
I understand, talking with you before, you really had to go through a process. Could you tell us about that to get these named?
Yes. Cindy Lewis, the gardener before me, spent years researching the peonies here, trying to figure out what they are, if she can. She had created a peony observation garden and where she planted current cultivars and tried to compare them to ours and see if they matched any of the plants. It's an ongoing process. There's still several peonies here left to identify, so we'll continue with that work, and maybe we'll be able to name a few more.
So basically you take a peony you think might be it, plant it next to it in this observation, and observe them for probably several years just to see if they really are indeed look the same.
She had to compare it down to the color of the stamens or the type of corolla around the petals. So it's a very detailed process.
You're naming some, you have some of these special ones. Do you have any of those for sale? Are you propagating these?
We are. The propagation is new, but we do currently sell some divisions of our historic peonies in the shop, and we also collect the seeds from those peonies that produce viable seed, and we sell those in the shop as well. With those, you could get a plant true to its parent or your own unique peony
You never know,
plant.
kind of
You never know with peonies.
And as far as the other gardens you mentioned, tell us a little bit about those.
We have a cutting and kitchen garden area, which is where the family historically had those type of gardens. It's also the area where the family recreated and spent their pleasure time. Currently, the cutting garden is used by the flower ladies, who are a group of volunteers who do the cut flowers in the house all summer long. The kitchen garden is also managed by volunteers, and they donate the food to the food shelf. It's a plant a row for the hungry garden. We have a butterfly garden in the same area, which is used by our education program. They bring school groups here during the school year and do programs on monarch butterflies and other bugs.
You mentioned a berry cage too. What is that?
We have a berry cage, which was designed with the help of Roger Swain and Gordon Hayward. It's an example of what a homeowner could do to grow berries. It keeps the cage is gorgeous, and it keeps the birds out. Doesn't keep the chipmunks out yet. But in there we have blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, gooseberry, currant, grapes, and sour cherries.
Curious, what does the word Hildene mean, or where did it come from?
Hildene was named that because of the features of the landscape here on the property. The hill part is obviously hills, such as the one we're standing on, and Dene means valley with a river that runs through it, which you can see from our overlook over here.
So thank you very much, Andrea, for spending some time showing us these lovely gardens you maintain here.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for watching today on Across the Fence. For University of Vermont Extension, I'm Leonard Perry.